Oh.
Good evening, everyone. And I've now forgotten what number of meeting it was. I looked it up, 2627, I think. There's something like that. Anyway, I'm sure that Ian will correct me if I'm wrong. Welcome, Philip. So good to see you. Hope you are well down south, and looking forward to your display on the country of Turkey, not George's turkeys. Anyway, would you like to start, Philip, when you're ready?
You're ready to unmute, Philip.
I'll start screen sharing. Right, can everybody see that?
Lovely.
Okay, I've got rather a lot of slides, so I'll rush the first bit and then slow down a bit when we get the war years. This is a sort of an overview of stamps and covers of the Ottoman Turkey from 1901 to 1923. Well, strictly speaking, Ottoman Turkey disappeared in 1922, so you've got a year of nationalist and republics time as well. The first thing I show you is in 1901, they introduced new issues of stamps, and they did two things. Because of the competition from foreign post offices, they introduced stamps for foreigners as a 20% discount to the face, which sort of basically fulfilled the purpose and encouraged foreigners to use the stamps. So the ones on the left were for internal use, and the ones on the right were for external use. They also had a printed matter overprint, so that just says mat bois, which means printed matter, on the stamps on the left, and the black and red ones at the bottom were the postage due stamps. They also introduced, for the first time since 1871, a new set of postal stationery envelopes, of which I show a few here. There's a lot more varieties, but I've just shown a few simple ones here. Both for these are ones actually for external. These top two are the internally used ones, and these are the externally used ones on the front. They also issued the usual range of postage cards, and they also issued a huge bunch of newspaper wrappers of various values, which are shown by the stamps on a brown background on the right. Again, this is just a selection, it's not the whole shooting match. A few examples. A letter from Constantinople to Leeds with a registration label. They introduced the registration labels, although they didn't last very long because they soon reverted just to a rubber hand stamp. You've got a cover internally from Keshan to Constantinople. And the thing to remember here is that the internal rate, they had three rates in Turkey. They had the internal rate, they had a little rate, so basically mail going along the shoreline by boat, and they had the international UPU rate. But the internal rate and the UPU rates were the same. So it was quite expensive sending letters in Turkey. And the bottom right cover is just a cover from Trabzon, Constantinople. The normal rate for abroad and internally was 1 piastre or 1 kurush, which was about tuppence halfpenny in this period, to give you an idea of the value. But the literal rate was half of the 1 kurush, or just 20 paras, and there's 40 paras into 1 piastre or 1 kurush. The word, I don't know where the word piastre came from, it's basically Frencherized somewhere, but the word kurush, which was what the Turks use, is a corruption of the German groschen, which is the currency used in German states for many years. Another registered letter top left, and then some naughty tourist bottom left sent a postcard from Trabzon to Amasya, which is distinctly inland, and got away with using stamps which were meant only for foreign use. So it shows that in some areas they weren't too closely following this. I also show quite a rare parcel card from 1903. In Turkey, the stamps were put on the company parcel card to show what was going on. But what happened was that the parcel card became the property of the post office. So these weren't supposed to be released back onto the market. And what they did is they used to take the stamps off and release them to dealers and that sort of thing. but you never saw the parcel cards until the war years. And then in the war years, they started releasing them. But then, before they released them, they applied a razor to the stamps. So it was all right if they left on the card, but if it came off, you had a nice slash through the middle of the stamp. And this is a parcel card for quite a registered parcel with a value of 26,000 piastres or 260 liras, which is quite a lot of money. And that's why it's so expensive, because of that large value. And it was going from Malatya, which is in the east of modern Turkey, down to Mosul, which of course is in modern day Iraq. They didn't go like those stamps didn't last too long. By the way, there were 2 different perforations, sizes, and every combination thereof you can think of. 1905, they came up with another new design. So that's basically the stamp shown top left. But instead of having a different set for the foreign use, they just overprinted some of the stamps with the Turkish letter B, which are the ones at the bottom left. And B stands for Behi here, or discount. And again, you had printed matter stamps and postage due stamps. But also here, instead of using the postage due stamps, they often use stamps just overprinted with the bilingual T, so a T in Latin script and a T in Arabic script to indicate the sort of postage due. And you find those were more common than the red postage due stamps. They issued some more postal stationery and basically changed the design of the card slightly for lots of different values. There's no point in going through all those, but there's lots of different ones. A few odd cards. Top left is a postcard from Djibouti to Salif, from Salif in Yemen to Air, not too far away from where you are now. Bottom left, triple rate cover from Hama to Aleppo. That's entirely within modern day Syria. And the one in the right, a couple on the right, modern covers, both going to the same place in France, using the discount stamps, which lets them off 20%. 1908, yet another issue, similar sort of thing. It's a series of stamps, the printed matter on the right. In this case, they've got either blue or red overprints to make them more easy to read. You have still the red papered postage due stamps, and again the letter B overprints for the discount stamps, and a few bits more of postal stationery, slightly different borders, but basically just the same idea as before. You have a registered cover shown on the left, and here you see they've gone back to the good old hand stamp, which says they've got an R at the bottom, and they say Tahoud at the top. Tahoud literally means contract, but it's what the Turks use for registration. And the one at the left from Elazığ to Malden in Essex. Notice that the London Post Office applied their own registration label when it got into England. And bottom left, I go from Constantinople to close where I am here, so that's for any Manchester people around, so they know I have a local cover. Parcel card again, but you see you could have 3 different parcels with the same parcel card. So here you've got 3 parcels and you just pay the cumulative amount for the 3 parcels together. This one got out, of course, because this was going to Switzerland, and Switzerland let you keep the parcel card, so you find those quite easily. The one on the right is a bit of an enigma. These were discount stamps and they're used for internal postage. So they didn't get cancelled by the post office when it left Izmir. But when it arrived in Syria, they applied only 1 kurush of postage due, which was, I don't understand why, because they should have charged twice the level, which is 2 kurush. And the writing on top of the 2 stamps, which they shouldn't have used for this purpose, says Izmo, Aleppo, Izmir, and then a date. So it indicated it probably went back to Izmir afterwards, because it was refused or something like that. You'll notice also this bilingual T mark here indicating this postage due. December 1908, the Sultan Abdulaziz was obliged to reinstitute the constitution which he had preliminarily agreed to in 1877, a mere 30 odd years before. And to celebrate this fact, they issued a set of stamps, which you see top left. And then you've got this cancelled by favour on a letter card with the Parliament hand stamp, postmark. So these were sort of in recognition of this happening. Unfortunately, he didn't last very long, because later that next year he was overthrown and he was replaced by a half brother who was known as Mehmet V. And what they did here is they took the 1908 stamps and replaced the inner part of the stamp, but kept the rest the same. And this is a bit that's different from the previous issue. This very small bit there, which basically refers to the Sultan's surname. And there are two attempts at this, because the first attempt was shown here in these two stamps here, where the crescent isn't quite complete or it's going the wrong way. And then they corrected it, and you get this type here where you can see the crescent is complete. Again, you had postage due stamps, and you had the discount stamps, and you had the printed matter stamps, just as before. Lots of these accumulation of issues. And the selection of postal stationery. These envelopes on the left are perhaps some of the scarcest of the early 20th century postal stationery. Postcard from Taksim to Rumeli Hisar on the Bosphorus, so local rates of just 10 piastre. A discount stamp going to Graz in Austria, so it's the 1 piastre normal rate, but of course they've got 20% off. And then you've got a large cover registered to Lozère in France. So that's 4 Carouche 10 Paris, so that's a heavyweight letter. This is interesting. You've got a couple of stamps which part paid the postage, and they've got a similar pair of stamps but with a T mark on them to indicate the postage due. And there's also another one on the back. It smells as if this might have been contrived by whoever Monsieur Joseph Livonis was. On the right, there's a register cover from Istanbul to Berlin, forwarded on to Hanover. A 10 Carouche stamps, probably over franked, because the franking was either enough for 200 grams, which is quite heavy, or 8,000 Carouche declared value, but there's no sign on the envelope of a declared value. So again, it might be of philatelic interest. It's difficult to say. 1913, yet another new issue. Commemorate 50 years of the General Post Office building in Istanbul. There's a postcard there showing you it. If you go in the door, which is just around the corner from there, then there's a little postal museum on the stairs, and in this upper part, just in these few bits up here nowadays. I suggest you, if you ever go to Istanbul, you have a look at that. It's quite easy to find. And again, you get a series of discount stamps for which are used. And then you have the nonsense of these postage due stamps, because they include a 2 para and 5 para values for which you have actually virtually never any use in postage due terms. So those are a bit laughable and quite clearly aimed at the collectors. With this issue, you also had your first set of booklets. So the 3 booklets, so it's a set of 10 paras, a booklet of 10 paras, a booklet of 20 paras, and a booklet of 1 Carouche. And if you look carefully, you see that if you open it, it looked at one side, it was in French, and the other side, it was in Turkish. And of course, the Turkish book, like the Arabs, they open it from the left to right, and a Western style Latin book is open right to left. So it means they could put printing on both sides, and they would both open the right way for them without any problem. Some more postal stationery with a new imprint, and a couple of examples of parcel card to Bern in Switzerland, and a letter with lots of stamps on, which must be going to Lemberg, that's in now Lviv in Ukraine, with the registered, but again, possibly with all the different issues on, so probably philatelically inspired. Then, of course, we have a period before this. The Italians attacked Libya in 1911, 1912, quickly took the main cities, but were unable to control the interior. because the Turks put up a resistance using the local nomadic Arabs who were living there. The next year, of course, you had the Balkan War, when all the Balkan states ganged up together against Turkey and took territory off the Turks. This resulted in the map being radically redrawn. The cover top left, you have a cover from Salonika to Athens. This was after, just at the end of the First Balkan War, using a Turkish stamp, but with a Greek postmark. So this was after they took them. The surprising thing, of course, Salonika was the second city of the Turkish Empire, so it was a big loss. But its population was also strange. It was the biggest population there was, first of all, the Jews who have been there since they were kicked out of Spain a few centuries before. The second biggest population group was the Bulgarians, and the Greek, which had actually occupied, they beat the Bulgarians in the race to Salonika, were in fact only the third largest subgroup, but they eventually took over it. The card top right was picture card of Muslim refugees from Salonika to Knockando in northeast Scotland, and it shows the problem with the flight. This caused Turkey a huge problem because a lot of Muslims fled the Balkan states and came into Turkey. And of course, Turkey had 750,000 refugees and didn't know what to do with them. So that gave them huge logistic problems. You also have a cover at the bottom, which is an official cover from the Home Ministry, trying to send it to Salonika. There's a note on it here, which says "Postasa yoktur," means there's no post, and this is return, impossible to send mail. So it seems strange that the Home Ministry didn't realise that certain areas they couldn't get mail through anymore. As a result of this time, of course, lots of islands pulled away, and some of them overprinted Turkish stamps. So Mytilene on Lesbos, that's this island here, they overprinted here. There's not a complete set, it's just some of them. So some of them read up and some of them read down. They just used the local stamps and printed them. Similarly, Lemnos used the Turkish stamps, but they created their own little, Lemnos is one island further north, big one, created their own negative hand stamp here. And then the Greek administration of Komotini, now Komotini, which is on this north coast here somewhere. I can't spot it at the moment, but it's in this part of Thrace here. This is a Greek administration. So again, they're overprinting the stamps and setting things up. In fact, this bit of through Western Thrace initially went to Bulgaria, not to Greece. It only became Greek much later. Western Thrace, this is the bit I was just showing you on the map. They issued stamps and postal stationery with the same thing. And here you actually see correspondence genuinely used. So a letter to Konya, a letter to Smyrna. The other thing to notice that these are in Turkish. So in that area of Thrace, the Turks were the majority population. So although they were happy to be independent, they still had their own language. And this was the bit that was eventually taken over by Bulgaria. At the end of the First Balkan War, the Bulgarians occupied Edirne, which is quite an important city from the Turks' point of view, because they used to have it used to be the capital before they conquered Istanbul. But this Bulgarian postcard was sent post-free from occupied Demirtaş, which is very close to Edirne, but they used the Turkish postmark. And the last one here is this strange philatelic cover, purportedly from Castellarizo, which was the Deccanese island that the Italians didn't occupy. During the Balkan Wars, the Italians snuck into Rhodes and a few other Deccanese islands, trying to force Turkey to agree that they actually now were the rulers of Libya. They succeeded in that at the end of the Second Balkan War. But this is one island they didn't occupy. But here, there were only 250 people living there at the most at any time. And these stamps are cancelled by an ecclesiastical hand stamp. So whether it was addressed to Mersin on Turkish coast, whether it got there, I don't know. It was Turkish until after the Turkish-Italian War. The French occupied it in 1915, became Italian as part of the Dodecanese Islands in 1922, and it finally became Greek after World War II. But again, it's only a very small population. As a result of the Second Balkan War and the Treaty of London, then Bradbury Wilkinson got in the act, and this set of stamps was issued to commemorate the Turks retaking Edirne back from the Bulgarians. They snuck in when the Bulgarians weren't looking, and basically had a bloodless takeover and got back in. So this is the Selemi Mosque in Edirne, one of the major mosques outside Istanbul. I think it's the only mosque, well, it's in now, but it was then. It was the only mosque with 4 minarets that wasn't actually in Istanbul. So you got a proof, you got a specimen set, you've some blocks, and then these were the postage due stamps. And again, you've got 2 and 5 para postage due stamps, which are no use at all postally. So again, it's they're aimed at the other collectors. Then January 1914, Bradbury issued a complete new set for the post office, and these were showing scenes around Istanbul, in and around Istanbul. It also had a new thing because in the highest value stamp, it showed a portrait of Mehmet V. So this was the first time a portrait had been shown on a Turkish stamp. This ship here, the Hamidiye, by the way, was built in Glasgow. And these are all various scenes around Istanbul. And these were printed by Bradbury at the beginning of the year. There are a few things. This was a proof of the 6 para in red, so it's the same stamp as issued. They designed an 8 para stamp, which had no postal use, so it was never issued. And this was an unissued 2 para stamp. It was the frame and picture of the 4 para, but a different part here. They also issued more booklets, 10 para booklet, which I've never managed to obtain, despite the fact it's meant to be the easiest one to get hold of. I have the 20 para book, the 1 curiosity book, and the mixed booklet. So those were all the booklets that were issued prior until, in fact, well into the 1960s. And that's a full sheet of stamps, somewhat foxed with age. But there it is. You can see Bradbury Wilkinson and Sons down at the bottom here. And these are the values. It says 1 3/4 piastres there, and that says 1 3/4 kurush. So they use the Turkish word there. They are postage due stamps. And for the discount, instead of having a letter B on, they put a little star on. So these were the discount stamps. Then on the 10th of July 1914, they had a national holiday, which was the anniversary of the new constitution that was declared in 1908. So that was that stamp. Then by 1st of October 1914, of course, at this stage, Turkey wasn't in the war. The war had kicked off in the rest of Europe. And the Turks used this as an excuse to abolish all the foreign capitulations, which basically means post offices are no longer allowed. They couldn't run their own laws for their own people. They had to use Turkish law and all this sort of thing. And the last thing I've shown you is the value in 1915, when, to use up stocks, they overprinted 2 of the higher values with slightly lower values to use them up. Now, of course, these stamps having been printed in Britain, it means by the end of, oh, sorry, no, we'll do more first. The departure from Turkish Regent practice, which was when they issued postal stationery, they use the same basic stamp design as was issued or the issue. Here they create a completely different stamp design for the postal stationery, which was basically based on the Sultan's Tura. They also did a peculiar thing that the paper and card that was used for the postal stationery bore a watermark which says Ministry of Posts and Telegraphs and Telephones. So that's this here that was in a watermark in the stationery. This width was about just under 11 centimeters, to give you an idea of the actual scale. These were some stamps. So you've got postal stationery envelope, the registered envelope, which was basically a direct, which was exactly the same as the British envelopes, the 2 bigger sizes as well. Postal stationery cards, And the novel one for the Turks at this time was that this letter sheet with a smaller letter sheet, a reply letter sheet folded inside, and of course newspaper wrappers. And here are just a few examples of those sort of stamps being used. The first top left one is meant to be an advice of receipt, but they haven't really paid enough to get that advice of receipt, so I don't know how that worked out. It should have been 3 grosz, not 2 grosz total postage. Quite clearly you have a letter to London here, quite clearly philatelic in sort and sent with lots of different values. You have a correctly franked postcard here with lots of different values, but it is the correct amount going to the Netherlands. And then this is one to Italy with using the discount stamp with a star on. These discount stamps, of course, were no longer discounted after they did away with the abrogations. And then this is the fair letter here. Sorry, this is sorry, take that back. This is the national holiday stamp, and this is the abrogation stamps. The German ship Gerben was in the Mediterranean at the beginning of World War I. It manages very successfully to avoid the British Navy and reached Istanbul, where it was renamed the Yavuz Sultan, but it kept its German crew. The thing the British didn't know is that they were having trouble with its boilers, and basically boiler aggro prevented the ship being used as much as it could have been used otherwise. So that's one of the things that kept it locked up in port. But it did some sorties, and in fact, before war was declared, it did a sortie into the Black Sea and shelled some Russian facilities and sunk a couple of Russian ships, which was actually before war was declared by Turkey. The cover on the right is just before Britain declared war on the 5th of November. So this is a letter addressed to the British Embassy, the Turkish Embassy in London, and needless to say, outbreak of war not deliverable. So it never got anywhere. Now then, what happened, of course, as a result of the war, all those nice stamps that Bradbury made, which are quite nice stamps, they couldn't get new ones. So what they did is they went to the store cupboards and dug out all the old issues which were sitting there doing nothing, and they overprinted them. And they overprinted them with a 6-pointed star, Star of David, and a crescent in which the date was 1331 after the era, which in our money is 1915. So I haven't shown you the whole lot here, but I've just shown you some of these stamps. At the same time, they issued this set of stamps, which is a charity issue. For an ordinary letter, you're supposed to put a £10 stamp on for the orphans of war matters and these sort of things. So that's what these stamps were done. And initially, again, this used a 6-pointed star. Again, this is not a complete set, it's just showing some of them. This was a premature set, which was issued in March 1916 to commemorate the occupation of Sinai, of course, which never happened. So they had a bit of ump pie to eat there. And this used to commemorate the 50 years of the city post in Istanbul, which is very strange because in 1866, this was set up by a Greek, not by the Turkish post office. They overprinted some of the postal stationery. This is a 6-pointed star, but then the Star of David went out of fashion and they switched to a 5-pointed star for later ones. And again, the same year, 1915. Now, older postal stationery cards, if they got this open crescent and star, this was for the benefit of officers in the Army and Navy, and it was supposed to accelerate mail. In practice, it wouldn't accelerate the mail because you're still dependent on the same routes and the same methods of transportation. This is interesting because it's from the adjutant to the Field Marshal Gultz in Baghdad to the 13th Army Corps. So it's from a German high-ranking officer. 1916, after they ran out, the Austrians in Vienna volunteered to print some more postal stationery cards. And again, they kept a postmark in the card for that. And they had just 2 values, 10 para, which was local, and 20 para, which was international and internal. Some parcel cards, which from Izmir to Zuluk, which is nearby, not too far away. Letter top right from Uzun, which is close to the Greek border to Istanbul. You notice that these now, and the letter here, have censor markings on. These are both Istanbul censors, but very strange that every town, with the military were in charge of the censoring, but everywhere had their own style of mark. They didn't have any uniformity on this one. And this here indicates the language that was used in the letter, so it meant for the correct censor. A registered letter going to Germany. Again, it's been censored by the Turks and also censored by the Germans as well. The one on the right, also doing the similar sort of thing. But this is interesting because there was a row here with the UPU, because the UPU says you can't insist on having charity stamps going abroad. And so if you put the charity stamp on, it would be 10 para extra for the charity for the postage, and also another 10 para extra for the registration. But here you've only got the basic rate of 2 piastres, which was the basic UPU rate. The rate got round that by upping the actual rate to foreign destination to 50 para, which sort of got round the thing. But this one here, the 20 para stamp is what you needed to for the UPU, but the person has voluntarily put on the charity stamp, which they weren't obliged to do it overseas. Then you had some more overprints. Again, you had the war orphan stamps, but here now you've got the 5-pointed star versions, and here you've got a 5-pointed star, but now with 1332, so this is 1916. And again, there was a whole issue of this, so there's about 60 or 70 of these stamps altogether. I haven't shown them all here. And again, you come up with stamps for the national holiday for the anniversary of the Constitution. This is interesting. These stamps were printed in Austria. They were never issued without overprints, and in fact the bottom 3 were never issued at all. These were, the top 3 were issued with overprints later on. They issued a new charity stamp, and then a couple of sets of high values of 10 piastre and 25 piastre and 25 piastre. 1916, the Royal Navy occupied Long Island. It was known by then, in those days, by its Greek name, which escaped me just at the moment, but it's still known today as Uzunada, which means the same thing, it means Long Island in Turkish. Again, this is not a complete set, it's just an example of things. There were only about 200 or so of these issued of each value, so there weren't vast numbers of these around. Parcel card, this is going back to Vienna, showing you a variety of the uses of the cards. This is a registered cover going back to Berlin, and this here is a Red Crescent charity stamp that was entirely a voluntary label, just to pay. In this case, it was 10 paras, so it wasn't a vast amount of money. And notice here you've got these bull's heads overprints, which I think I come to the next one, which is here. These bull's heads, of course, have said that because of the nature, but what it actually says is PTT. So it's basically post office, telegraphs and telephones in the Turkish principal letters only. And again, there was a huge number of these, so they actually really dug back to the 1865 issue on these initial stamps here, and even Eastern Romalia stamps were overprinted with these things, as well as other more recent ones. Even these ones from the Slemini in Moscow overprinted with the bull's head. They also had these 2 stamps printed in Vienna, but they were never issued as stamps. They were running out of small coins to use as change. So what they did with these is they mounted these stamps on card and reperforated them and split them up. And this was a 5 para and a 10 para. And they also did the same thing with this Hejaz railway revenue stamp of a 1 lira one, but in fact they overprinted 10 para. So that would also give you a 10 para small coin and split them up. However, just to confuse things, this postcard was sent from Diyarbakir to Eyüp Sultan, which is a district of Istanbul, and they actually use these as proper stamps, which is the only example I've ever come across. They do say Ottoman postage on it, but of course they were never actually formally issued for that, so I don't know how they actually got onto this sale through the post office. This complicated negative mark is an army inspection mark. Some more stamps, again, not issued without overprints from Vienna. These were all issued later with these various overprints on them. And then finally, in 1917 on to 1918, they issued a new definitive sets. And after that, basically, they had enough stamps. So just various values, again, showing various things, including a Gallipoli map, 2 Gallipoli maps, pyramids in Egypt, and the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul. Some inducers. This is to Leipzig, registered from Paris to Leipzig, great. The International Post Office was actually situated at Galata, which is across the Golden Horn from Istanbul. And this is actually a Galata centre rather than an Istanbul centre, which makes more sense because that's where it all was done. This was originally going to Lausanne in Switzerland, and this was a parcel card used, money order. It was a parcel card used as a money order to send some money from a small place south of Giresun, which is on the Black Sea, to Izmir. And you see that to get the right amount, they had to bisect a stamp. This was coming fairly common during the war years. This one is a front and back. Again, it's a formula postcard. Again, it's showing they're running out of ordinary stationery because this was used also as a money order card. They just wrote the appropriate thing on the front and put the right amount of stamps on the back for the amount of 34 kurush, which would pay for the money order for 4,600 kurush to be sent. Another Swiss one with, again, right franc 50 para. And here a postcard again using a money order. There's a postal station. This was a formula card with only stamps on. This was the 1916 issue, but used as a money order for 500 kurush, and that had the correct total franc, you know. The Turks signed an armistice in October 1918. By January 19, they overprinted a bunch of stamps commemorating the armistice, and that's this set here. That's a newspaper wrapper with various stamps on. And at the end, in 1918, Mehmet V had died. He was replaced by his half brother, became Mehmet VI. So that was a Mehmet VI session stamp, which I'm going to show you on the next page. So although he exceeded the throne in 1918, it was July 1919 before they celebrated it. So these set of stamps were for his the inauguration of Mehmet VI. And then they issued 1 year on the throne, but they did that in December 1919. So that was 5 months late. And you had some of this set. You also had a few postage due stamps overprinted as well. You hardly ever saw this set of stamps used on cover, correctly used, unless they're philatelic. A few more now Ottoman covers. The one at the top left is an Ottoman cover from a Turkish post office, the Italian post office in Istanbul, and lots of different stamps on, so almost certainly philatelically inspired. The one top right has the anniversary set, or part of them, most of the anniversary set, but going to Denmark, again, probably philatelically inspired. But then at the bottom right, you've actually got a correctly used letters, May 1920, registered going from Uşak to Izmir. Uşak's inland from Izmir a little bit. So that's bank letters, which still seem to work. Despite all the problems within Anatolia after the First World War, the mail, generally speaking, seemed to get through. Going back now, of course, since the British had basically occupied Istanbul after the war, bribery was back in circulation, so they dusted off the old stamps and the old things and printed a few new ones. The turas are slightly modified because the Sultan's individualization of the tura is no longer on it, but these stamps are used. But then inflation set in, so they had to overprint them for the higher rate very soon afterwards. And there's a couple of examples here used. So letter top left from Istanbul to Munich, top right from Istanbul to somewhere called Marnhull and forward to London. I'm not sure where that is, but it's the correct tariff. And then a final letter here, October 22, just before the Sultanate was kicked out, a letter to Poland, which must have been useful, from Constantinople to Poland, with the correct rate of 7.5 piastres with the overprinted stamp. During the war, of course, the Armenians had suffered. The Turks regarded the Armenians as traitors, largely because the Russians recruited about 6 divisions of soldiers from the Armenians in the area that they occupied after 1878. So because they didn't trust them in the area close to the front line in the northeast of Turkey, they deported them down towards the Syrian desert. Now then, Talat, who was the Home Minister, basically set a trap. As soon as they basically left towns, they were ambushed. A lot were killed by bandit bands ruled by Talat. And then, since it was done at a bad time of year, a lot of them also died because of the atrocious weather conditions. The Turks themselves admitted under British control that 750,000 died. The Armenians will claim over 2 million died. And the correct answer is somewhere in between, but nobody knows. There's also a postcard there showing HMS Malaya anchored at East Constantinople. HMS Malaya was a battleship, and it carried the last Sultan into exile in November 1922 after the nationalists had abolished the Sultanate. Now we go back in date a little bit to the nationalist issues. After the war, the British came in. You had a period when lots of banditry and not total control. The British sent officers out everywhere to help supervise supposedly the disarmament of the Turkish army, but in fact they didn't have much control. They also made the mistake of letting Kemal Atatürk be the inspector general of the Turkish army, and so let him go to Samsun, and then he promptly started organizing the nationalists. They, of course, needed stamps. So the first thing they did is they dug out any old stamps they got, which were generally the low value stamps of no much use. So they overprinted them, 3 kurush, which was then the current postage rate for a letter. And these are the various stamps shown, issued, done that way. They also dug out loads of revenue stamps. This is religious tribunal stamps and law court stamps on the right, and overprinted them saying Ottoman Post 1920 or 1336 it was there, and then they just get the same value as they were used for the revenue. So in this case, you've got 1 for 50, 50s, 100, and 500. These are sort of 5, 10, and I can't read that one. I think that's 10 as well. But these were done by 2 methods. The first lot were done in a newspaper office, then they hand stamped some, and then they went back to doing it entirely in the newspaper office. Now then, the trouble is that the hand stamped ones in between are some very rare ones that are worth a lot of money. The equivalent ones that were typographed by the newspaper office, of course, are much more common. So you had a red notarial overprint on a black one here. On other stamps, you have law courts and officers stamps here, religious tribunal stamps, but they're typographed rather than the other ones. Here you've got this similar sort of stamp, but it's got the notarial overprint first. Then you have a different sort of notarial stamps overprinted, theatre tax stamps, imperial registry, Ministry of Foreign Affairs stamps. All these were used. Then you come down to Ministry of Finance revenue stamps. You see these a lot. They dug out all the old revenue stamps for the Irish Railway and overprinted them in various values. Some of them don't make sense because that was a 1 kurush stamps. That was their own kurush, but on 1 kurush. That was 1 kurush on 1 kurush, but with a different format. That was 2 kurush on 1 kurush. That was 5 kurush on 1 kurush. And that was 20 para or half a kurush on 1 kurush. They also have these Navy League charity labels, which they were printed for use as stamps, which they had access to, so they were used as well. And then jumping forward a little bit now, 1st of December 1921, well, before then, the French had agreed to give up Cilicia, and they celebrated that by issuing a series of stamps. Of course, Adana had stamps there which were issued by the authorities and therefore had access to different sets of stamps to nationalists. But they took these stamps and overprinted them, which basically says Adana 1st of December 1921, and that was commemorating the fact that Cilicia was now in nationalist hands. And then 5 weeks, 6 weeks later, they issued a second set. This was an unissued set of stamps printed by the Italians for showing the Salemi Mosque in Iderna, and they were used for the same thing, celebrating the Adana freedom. The Italians, although they initially occupied southwestern Anatolia, basically withdrew quite early on and kept in good terms with the nationalists, such good terms that they arranged to print stamps for them. So you have this set of stamps on the left-hand side, the postage due stamps at the top right, printed. The interesting thing here is that the early stamps say on the Ottoman posts, but the later stamps say Turkish posts. So they're dropping the word Ottoman and going over the word Turkish. And in one value here for the 50 para, then it's you have both the Ottoman post and the Turkish post on the same sign. All the others say one or the other. This set of stamps was issued in 1922, and they show the initial Parliament building in Ankara. A few usages. A register cover from Istanbul to London. It was returned because in those days, after the war, the rail route, which used to be the main route to getting mail to Europe, was no longer open through Bulgaria and on that way. So this was therefore returned. Why they didn't send it through the ships through the Mediterranean, I don't know. I can't answer that. There's a postcard, obviously, from a British officer in Konya. He's hedging his bets. He put both Turkish stamps and a British stamp on, and actually cancelled though by the Army Post Office Weimar, which was, of course, from Istanbul. So it went through Istanbul onto Jerusalem. And this was just another British one, a cover from Istanbul to the 3rd Marine Battalion on Mudros Island with an FPO 85 postmark. So that was, they'd been there 6 months by the time that was sent. Top cover is a cover which was going to be sent from Marash, which at that time was still occupied by the French, to Istanbul, but Marash was surrounded by the nationalists. So that couldn't get out of the route. So basically it sat there for a while until eventually the French had surrendered to Marash, and then it was allowed out through the nationalist route through Sivas and on to Istanbul. The bottom cover is a registered front from Adana to Istanbul, showing a Cilicia overprint on 1914 20 para envelope and a couple of EEF stamps to make up the postage. You had people overprinting stamps. Most of Thrace was occupied by the Greeks. So you got the left has got stamps overprinted in Tekidah, which was then known by the Greeks as Rodosto. And they were overprinted with various values, and they were Greek administration. You can find these without too much difficulty, but I've never seen those used. You had another set of stamps which are basically overprinted on Turkish stamps, but saying High Commission of Thrace, and these were issued in Edirne. And of course, this set is obviously cancelled by favour. Going on to the next card, I'll come back to the left-hand one. The right-hand one is from a stamp dealer in Edirne advertising his wares. And the interesting thing here is that this set here is this set of stamps here. So he's basically getting on the bandwagon and trying to flog them abroad very quickly. The top left-hand cover is a letter from Diyarbakir to Istanbul, so it's entirely internally, arrived in 13th of March. And you notice here that Diyarbakir, being a remote place in eastern Turkey, still has 1914 stamps available to use and uses them. And that happened quite a bit, that some of these remoter places in the remoter parts of Anatolia had postage stamps from before the war because they didn't have that great a use of postage requirement for postage stamps. This is a letter a nationalist letter showing the use of the Ejaz railway stamps from Samsun to Istanbul. Obviously went by a coastal steamer. That's a Samsun censor mark. The nationalist censored mail, but the British by now had not stopped censoring mail. And then you have a front and back of a parcel card, a money order card with a use of 100 piastre stamp. This is a postcard using a bisected stamp to make up the total rate. So you've got an overprinted revenue stamp plus the basic card rate plus this bisected stamp, making up the correct rate of 3 kurush, which was the correct rate at that time. And on the right, you've got this 500 kurush stamp here used as part of a money order. 500 kurush there was getting quite a bit of money. There weren't stamps of that value issued until inflation took off in 1970, in the early 1970s. So there was a long time when they didn't have anything of that value at all for use. And that was a registered parcel of 65,000 kurush from Kayseri to Samsun, so entirely within the nationalist area and entirely with nationalist stamps on them. Greek occupied Bursa to a Greek officer in Eskişehir routed via Istanbul. So you've got a Turkish stamp with a Turkish postmark, but with a Greek censor mark. Here you got something entirely within the nationalist area, so 2 bisects to make up the correct rate from Tokat to Konya. And here this formula card from Adapazarı to Istanbul, Kumkapı, the Sangate. And you notice again, this is the censor mark for Adapazarı, and you can see you've got this nice butterfly type shape. So they all did their own thing on these censor marks. A few more on that sort of thing. Letter on the left, this is more unusual because it's a nationalist letter going out of the nationalist area abroad. There's not a lot of these letters around. There's a lot of mail that you can find within Turkey, but you don't find the nationalist material getting outside Turkey. So this went from Ankara to Munich in 1922. Here's another insured parcel card for 140,000. And this goes one further because that's 1,000 kurush stamp, which is quite a lot. So 1,000 kurush would have been about £5 or something like that, in £5 sterling in those days. A couple of oddities without stamps. The one on the left is a letter from the Turkish General Merat Pasha in Diyarbakir. He was the Mesopotamian front commander, of course, although Turkey didn't control anything in Mesopotamia anymore. And it's going to General Lamoche in Adana, in Aleppo. The French general there was in charge of what's happening in that part of Syria. It's interesting that it went via Adana, which is a long way around to get to Aleppo. And the one on the right is a much later letter from Karahisar, which is Afyon to Bolvedin, which is nearby. This was a court letter, but because the Greeks had destroyed all the stocks in Afyon post office during the war and all the stamps and everything, they dug out this old postmark from 1861 to use on court documents. So this is an 1861 postmark, which says, yes, this is an official letter going post free. And then my last 2 covers, definitely in the Turkish Republic, because it's been in Republic from 23rd of October 1923. Registered cover from Istanbul to Copenhagen, showing a couple of those Genoese stamps, printed stamps, the correct rate, no problem with that at all. And the very last one I'm showing is a parcel card, again, because I like to show these for an insured amount, which is a declared value here of 250,000 piastres, then about £600. And you've got 5 of these 500 piastre Genoese stamps shown there, plus a couple of small values from the First Republic issue of Turkey, which was issued in early 1923. And with that, that's everything. Thank you very much.
Philip, I don't know what to say. I'm absolutely gobsmacked because that was absolutely fascinating. How you have the time to research the stuff that you have shown us tonight is amazing. It was wonderful. Thank you so much. I look at some of these stamps and think, no, I'm not interested in here. I don't understand them. I couldn't read them. I can't see them. I need a magnifying glass to look at every single one of them to try and make out what it was. But you have done so much work and made it sound so interesting. So please, would everybody give Philip the well-deserved thanks that thank you.
Thank you very much, Maureen. Much appreciated.
Yeah, I thought that was, I don't know how time. Julia must have a lot of other things to do in her time if you're doing your stamps.
That's all right. She keeps occupied with art and things. It's all right.
Anyway, thank you very much indeed. I hope to see some of you tomorrow evening. Looking forward to that as well. I think I'm organised. And next week, well, it did say in the programme alphabet lottery. Well, it's just a bit of a lottery because I've phoned up some people and they are going to do displays. So it's a do-it-yourself week next week. And I look forward to seeing you all then. Thank you very much, everyone.
Good night. Good night. Thank you very much.
Good night.
Good night.
All right.